The United Kingdom has one of the highest rates of fuel poverty in Europe. One of the most significant contributors to fuel poverty is the high cost of energy. This video will look at fuel poverty and explore the extent to which fuel-poor households could benefit from the use of wood fuel as a cheaper source of domestic heat. What is fuel poverty? The most common definition of fuel poverty used in the United Kingdom is known as the 10% indicator. This states that a household is fuel poor if they must spend over 10% of their total household income to maintain their home at an adequate temperature. Adequate is defined as 21 degrees Celsius for the main living area and 18 degrees for other rooms of the house. This might seem rather high to many people in Britain, but it is based on WHO recommendations, which take into account the needs of more vulnerable people, such as infants, the elderly, or anyone with a condition that limits their mobility, and therefore their ability to maintain their own body temperature. In reality, many people underheat their homes according to the WHO standards, so fuel poverty is modelled using an algorithm that factors in fuel costs, household income, and the thermal efficiency of the home. This definition isn't perfect, of course. A household might be defined as fuel poor, but 10% of their income might be enough to keep their home at 17 degrees all through the winter, or they might not be able to afford to turn the heat on at all. In short, the 10% indicator doesn't take into account the depth of fuel poverty. However, it does give some indication of fuel poverty, and as it is the most widely used indicator by both policymakers and academics, most of the data available refers to this definition. Using the 10% indicator, the Department of Energy and Climate Change estimates that 4.75 million British households are living in fuel poverty, which represents roughly 19% of all households in the country. Fuel poverty is not spread evenly through the population. A number of different factors increase the likelihood of a household living in fuel poverty. Northern Ireland has the highest proportion of fuel-poor households, followed by Scotland, Wales and England respectively. Rural households are more likely to be in fuel poverty than urban households, and single households are more likely to be in fuel poverty than households made up of a couple or a family. Lack of adequate heating leads to homes that are perpetually cold and damp. There are a number of negative health effects associated with living in such conditions. The risk of suffering from a respiratory disease is more than doubled in children living in cold homes compared to those living in warm homes. Infants in fuel-poor households have lower weight gain, higher hospital admission rates, and slower development as rated by their caregivers. There is a relationship between excess winter deaths and low indoor temperatures. Excess winter deaths is the difference between the number of deaths in winter months and the average number of deaths during the rest of the year. It is estimated that the level of excess winter deaths is almost 3 times higher in the coldest quarter of housing than it is in the warmest quarter. Many of these deaths are caused by strokes, myocardial infarctions, or pulmonary embolisms brought about by changes to blood pressure and chemistry caused by cold weather. People suffering from Parkinson's, dementia, or other chronic conditions may have restricted movement, which will further hinder their ability to stay warm in an underheated home. Lower educational attainment has been linked to fuel poverty as well. Children living in fuel poverty miss more days of school. In addition, families struggling to heat their homes may only heat one common area, meaning there is no quiet place for children to do their homework. Fuel poverty can contribute to or exacerbate mental health problems, both from the stress of worrying about high fuel bills and from living in constant cold and damp. It is clear then that fuel poverty is an issue of social justice, so how can it be fixed? The first step is to understand the causes of fuel poverty. The 3 main factors that contribute to fuel poverty are low income, high energy costs, and living in a home with low thermal efficiency. Roughly 60% of households living in fuel poverty have a high required spend on energy, for example because of being off the mains gas network and needing to use electricity to heat their home instead. 75% have a low income, i.e. below the national median. 50% live in a thermally inefficient building, and almost 20% of fuel-poor households fall into all three categories. These three factors represent three different angles for attempting to solve the problem. Firstly, by increasing incomes in general. Secondly, by reducing energy costs. And thirdly, by improving the thermal efficiency of the housing stock. The winter fuel payment is an example of an attempt to directly address fuel poverty by increasing income. This government scheme gives between £100 and £300 to those aged 62 and over to help towards the cost of energy bills in the winter. However, only about 50% of fuel-poor households are eligible to receive this payment. Ofgem is the government department responsible for ensuring that energy prices are set fairly by providers. However, fossil fuel prices are expected to rise further in the future as the supply dwindles, so alternative energy sources will need to be found. This is where wood fuel comes in. There are three main types of domestic wood fuel: logs, wood chips, and wood pellets. Logs are usually cheaper than wood chips or pellets, but take up more space for storage. They can only be used for stoves and boilers that are fed manually, rather than automatic systems. Wood chips are made from thinnings or waste wood using a wood chipper. When they're used in small domestic systems, they need to be of a uniform size and have a very low moisture content. Larger systems, such as for a block of flats, may be able to handle less standardized wood chips, which may reduce the cost further. Pellets are made from wood byproducts such as sawdust. They are more expensive by weight than wood chips, but are also more energy dense due to their low moisture content. This also means that they take up less storage space than wood chips for the same energy produced. Their uniform size makes them well suited to automated boilers. Wood fuel is a potentially cheaper source of domestic heat compared with other fuels, as the price for wood chips and pellets per kilowatt hour is lower than mains gas, oil, and electricity. It's hard to estimate the price per kilowatt hour for logs because logs are not uniform. The energy they give off will depend on the moisture content and the type of wood. Also, the price of logs varies widely as well, because some are bought from commercial suppliers and some are bought for much less as part of an informal arrangement with landowners. The price of wood fuel is cheaper than other sources of energy, so can its use help to reduce fuel poverty? In order to answer this question fully, three things have to be considered. Firstly, are wood fuel heating systems suitable for fuel-poor households? Secondly, is the wood fuel supply adequate for widespread use, or could the supply grow to meet the demand? And thirdly, what would be the social, economic, and environmental impact of the widespread use of fuel wood for heating? So to answer the first question, are wood fuel heating systems suitable for fuel-poor households? Well, wood fuel might be cheaper to buy per kilowatt hour, but the costs of installing a wood-burning system must also be taken into account. A log-burning stove can cost as much as £2,000 to buy and install, and an automatically fed pellet boiler for a home of roughly average size could cost around £11,000. Maintenance of these systems can cost an additional £100 per year. Given the association between fuel poverty and low income, these costs may be prohibitive to some households. The Renewable Heat Incentive, or RHI, is a government scheme that encourages the use of renewable heat sources, such as wood fuel, by paying households and businesses per kilowatt hour of energy generated. The RHI is designed to offset the installation costs of renewable heating systems and could make the systems more accessible to people on low incomes. However, the RHI is not without drawbacks. Because it pays people per unit of energy generated, there is an incentive for people to produce more need. Unlike electricity, where the surplus can be fed back into the grid, excess heat cannot be easily used by others. There have been anecdotes of heat from wood fuel going to waste so that people can continue to receive their payments. There are other factors that may mean wood fuel is unsuitable for a particular household. For example, for fuel-poor households living in private rented accommodation, landlords may be unwilling to pay for installation when the savings would go only to the tenants. There may not be enough storage space for the logs, wood chips or pellets. The building may not have a chimney, or a chimney may not be able to be installed. And for systems that use logs, the householders may not be physically able to stack and carry the logs. So wood fuel would not be suitable for all households that live in fuel poverty, but there would be a subset of fuel-poor households for whom wood fuel might be suitable, in which case, could the supply of wood fuel in the UK grow to keep pace with increased use of wood fuel by these households? And if so, where would it come from? The additional wood fuel could come from a number of sources, such as better management of woodlands that are currently undermanaged, by utilising arboricultural arisings and sawmill wastes that are currently not being used, by making better use of recovered wood, i.e. the wood that is removed from homes and businesses after renovation, and by the creation of new woodlands. The Forestry Commission England estimates that these sources could generate as much as 2 million green tonnes of wood fuel per year. Another untapped resource for wood fuel in the United Kingdom is agroforestry. Agroforestry is the deliberate inclusion of trees or other woody perennials onto agricultural land. The practice of growing trees in combination with crops is known as silvo-arable, and trees grown in combination with grazing land is known as silvopasture. There is estimated to be over 157,000 hectares of agroforestry in the UK, the majority of which is hedgerow trees. Trees on agricultural land provide a number of benefits, which will be discussed in the next section. Agroforestry has the potential to help meet future demand for wood fuel through practices such as coppicing hedgerows to make wood chip, and managing shelter belts, both for fuel and to protect livestock. Currently, however, the policy climate in Europe is not supportive of agroforestry. Farmers do not receive single farm payment for land that has more than 100 trees per hectare, which can mean considerable financial losses for farmers adopting agroforestry. This lack of support stems from the traditional separation of agriculture and forestry, which means that policymakers often struggle to see the two sectors as complementary. Woodlands and trees on agricultural land provide a range of environmental benefits. Trees promote biodiversity by providing habitat for mammals, birds, and invertebrates. Trees sequester carbon during the course of their lives, which balances out the carbon released when the wood is burned. It is not accurate to say that the wood fuel is carbon neutral or carbon zero, because there are emissions associated with the harvesting, transport, and processing of the wood. However, wood fuel is low carbon compared with fossil fuels, so increasing the tree cover in the UK would result in a net reduction in atmospheric carbon. The roots of trees help to reduce soil erosion, which is especially beneficial on agricultural land, as it prevents the loss of nutrients. It also reduces the amount of excess nitrogen that ends up in watercourses. Additionally, trees planted in upland areas can reduce the risk of flooding downstream. The soil beneath trees has been shown to absorb water 60 times faster than that in grazed pastures. This reduces surface runoff, meaning that water is carried downstream more gradually after a heavy rainfall. Increasing the production of wood fuel in the UK could benefit the rural economy as well. Jobs would be created at each stage of the wood fuel supply chain, which in turn would support other businesses such as hardware stores and garages. There are also some potential negative effects of increasing wood fuel production. If wood fuel were to become very profitable, it could raise the price of timber, which would have a negative impact on industries that rely on domestically grown timber, such as artisanal carpentry. And if the price of wood were to rise, it would mean that wood fuel would no longer be a cheaper alternative than mains gas, oil, or other fossil fuels, which would mean that it wouldn't be suitable for fuel-poor households, as the same savings wouldn't be felt. Another consequence could be that it would be deemed more profitable to plant monocultures than mixed woodlands. This would be at the expense of biodiversity and amenity value, and may make the plantations more vulnerable to pests and diseases. An increase in demand for wood fuel might mean that wood is imported from overseas, possibly from countries with less strict regulations on tree felling, which may lead to the overexploitation of global forest resources. So to recap, wood fuel appears to be suitable for a subset of fuel-poor households. Increasing the supply of wood fuel in the UK is possible, and doing so would have many potential environmental and social benefits. There would also be a few negative impacts that would need to be avoided. That still leaves the third component of fuel poverty, thermal efficiency of the housing stock. Remember, 50% of fuel-poor households live in buildings that are thermally inefficient. It is estimated that nationwide, £1 out of every £4 spent on domestic heating is lost due to poor insulation. Levels of fuel poverty in the UK do not compare favourably to many other European countries. Despite colder winters and higher energy prices in many of these countries, more rigorous building standards, higher quality insulation, and newer housing stock have led to lower levels of fuel poverty. Building standards in the UK have improved, and new builds are much better insulated. However, many fuel-poor households live in older buildings, which are still very thermally inefficient. This graph shows that the older a building is, the more likely a household is to experience fuel poverty. 18% of households living in homes built before 1919 are fuel poor, compared to 13% in homes built between 1919 and 1964. Homes built after 1964 have just 6% of fuel-poor households. Using a potentially cheaper source of energy such as wood fuel will not be able to reduce fuel poverty if the thermal efficiency of the housing stock is not addressed. Retrofitting existing buildings to improve their efficiency will be crucial to make the most of the savings from using wood fuel. Such improvements can be expensive, so may not be accessible to those households who experience fuel poverty due to low income. There are initiatives such as the Green Deal, which allow people to pay back the cost of improvements over time from the savings on their energy bills. However, uptake of the Green Deal has been extremely low, and there is still the issue of tenure. Fuel-poor households living in private rented accommodation may not feel able to request improvements from their landlord for fear of eviction. They may not even realise they are entitled to such schemes. In conclusion, fuel poverty is a social issue with serious consequences for health and well-being. Because fuel poverty is the result of several factors, there is no single solution to address it. Wood fuel is a potentially cheaper source of domestic heat and, as such, could be a solution for some households. In addition, scaling up the use of wood fuel could result in greater tree cover in the UK, which would bring a number of environmental, social, and economic benefits. However, conversion to wood fuel is not suitable for all fuel-poor households, and there are potential negative effects that would need to be addressed before considering scaling up wood fuel production in the UK. The thermal efficiency of the existing housing stock must also be improved in order to make the most of the savings from conversion to wood fuel.